Hi there! Today we're going to do a really fun technique on paper that you've probably all seen. It's very simple and basic. It's sponge printing. People used to do this on walls and furniture, and today we're going to do it on paper. The things you need are paper, of course. Any weight paper except, as usual, don't try computer paper. It's too thin, it won't hold the dyes or paints properly. Any kind of art drawing paper. Basically go to your art store or even any store that has some drawing paper. Doesn't have to be super specific. For the paints, you can use almost anything. You could use acrylics, tempera paint that children use in schools. You could probably use food color, but I'm not sure if it would be a bit too liquidy. It might work. My paints are quite liquidy. I'm using, as usual, my silk paints, which happen to be from G&S Dye in Toronto. They're called liquid colors. You can hear that shake. They're like ink. They're quite liquidy. There's a link in the description for those. So the paint, the papers, the other thing, of course, you need is a sponge. So we can use natural sponges, sea sponges, which you can get in art stores. You could probably find them in, if you live in a seaside place, in some kind of a tourist souvenir place. Or what's very simple, anybody can get, is the usual little household sponge. Now, when you go to get these, they usually have a scrubber on one side. Not always, but these days usually. You have to get the cellulose. There's a cellulose sponge. They do have sponges that are more the foamy type of, whatever it's made of. This is made of cellulose, and it feels, when it's dry, it feels sort of papery. Most importantly, it has this texture with the natural looking holes. You could try a loofah sponge, but these work amazingly and they're cheap. I've gotten one and cut it up so I can use it in different colors. I'm not doing a large piece, so I'm happy to use small sponges. So the paper, the dyes or paints, the sponges. I always have newsprint under my paper because it can get quite messy. Going back to the thickness of the paper, I tend to use something that I can manipulate afterwards because I make this paper jewelry afterwards. Fans, I have to wrap it around this, so I don't use particularly thick paper. You could use some kind of thinner watercolor paper. Try it out and see how it works. So here we go. So I already have dipped these and used them, obviously. This is my yellow one. So we're just going to dip it in the dye or paint. I'm taking a bit of excess off because I don't want to have a whole splodge. I want to get that texture. So when I hit it on the paper, I'm just hitting very lightly. That center isn't pressing, so I'm pressing that. It's just a really easy technique to play with. Just start with inexpensive materials and see how it feels. I'm going to put a bit more yellow on. I tend to want to do, oh, that was too much paint. That's what happens when you don't wipe off enough paint. And you can press more or you can press less. Play and see what you like. You might like a lot of paint. So I tend to keep going all over, and I mix the colors and I make a fairly cohesive colored pattern. You can stop whenever you want. So there's and you could let it dry before you do the next pattern, or I've never really, I usually am just playing with this, so I haven't really ever tried out which is better. It would probably look different, but for instance, this blob is gonna, if I sponge on top of that, it will get a bit messy. But with this light print, it doesn't usually affect anything too much. The colors usually just sit where they are because there's not a lot of paint going on the paper. How quick and easy and fun. A great technique to play with children. They love it. If they wanted to make a book cover or something, or put it incorporate it in a picture. And I'm going to go with blue. Wiping some off. Sometimes when you work on things like this, you might think, oh, that's not much, but just keep going. It's sort of like when you're working on a creative project and you might show it to someone before it's finished. Never show it to people before it's finished, because they don't know what your end idea is, and they might not be impressed. Now that's fairly light colors. Normally I would add another color, but because I haven't got it poured out, I'm not going to this time. Here's a previously done one. This is on a slightly heavier paper, but it's the same idea. And I've just probably put 4 colors in there with the royal blue, which makes it all look a bit darker. And here's yet another one where I added some purple, which when it mixed with the yellow gave me this kind of goldy brown color. So that looks even kind of darker. But I think I'm going to stop there for that one. Now here's a second piece, the same paper, and I'm going to try this sponge. I've only got this one piece right now, so I'll have to wash it between colors. And it is very well used. I mean, I think they probably work a bit better fresher. This sponge is probably 30 years old. I don't use it that much. You know, if I was keeping this good, I would wash it well between each use to keep it just not quite so rigid, and it's fairly rigid there. So let's do the same thing and then compare. I'm going to start with yellow. See how it's not soaking in at all because those ends are so dried out. But it's amazing how far it goes. If you were using acrylic, I don't know if it would go this far, but this paint, it's not super cheap, it's not super expensive, but it really goes a long way in this kind of technique. And you can see the difference. You'll really see the difference by the end. They're bigger marks and different size marks within the sponge. Okay, I just washed my sponge. Now when you, it's a little bit damp, never use it really wet, but if you have to wash it or if you start with it wet, really squeeze it out so it's damp. Now we're going to go to pink, and I'm still going to rub some off and try not to speckle my paper too much. That's another technique, you can speckle paper. I also don't want too much watery wetness in the paper because that's going to make it kind of rippled, and this dye kind of sits on top for the most part, so it's not going to really wet and ripple the paper. Okay, washed again and back in the blue turquoise. When I'm touching, I'm really tapping it very lightly. You can play with that, of course. If it's too light, press a little harder. I'm trying to keep it consistent, so I'm trying to do the same kind of pressure everywhere. Now they're the same colors. Interesting. We'll compare the two. Again, in my world, I would add another color. I'd probably add royal blue. Everybody has their own color preferences, but that's quite cheery. So that's the big sponge. And you may think it's fairly the same, but look at the difference. This gives a super fine, delicate texture, and this is much bolder. They're both nice, they're just very different. So that's the basics of sponge printing. Now we're going to make these lovely paper fan earrings. The first thing we're going to do before we make anything is iron the paper just briefly. There we are. We've got some paper already. So what you need for this is your paper, the paper you just sponge painted, ironed and ready, nice and flat. And to cut that, you can use scissors. You're going to have to measure a certain size, but you can do that with scissors. If you don't have a cutting board, you should use a cutting board. You can use the scissors. If you have a cutting board, a knife and ruler is more exact, a little more easy. And then you need some findings to make them into earrings. You need the jump rings and the ear hooks. The jump ring should be about 10 centimeters or larger because that ring has to fit through about 1/4 of an inch of the paper and then stick up enough that you can put the ear hook on it. Now to make that hole to put the jump ring through, you need a large needle. It doesn't have to be this long, but it needs to be sharp, and it also needs to be a bit thick. So whatever tool or needle you can find to do that. You need to make a hole big enough for the thickness of that size jump ring. And the last thing you need is pliers, little jewelry pliers, just to be able to twist the jump rings on and off. I use 2, you can get by with just 1. And one other thing you need, if you want to coat them, you don't absolutely have to coat them, but if you want them to last and not get worn as you're handling them, some kind of coating. I'm going to use Artist Gloss Medium. You can use, there's all kinds of coatings out there for crafts. Anything that's kind of you can use some kind of diamond finish, but this is what I'm going to use, Gloss Medium. So now we can get started. So to begin, we're going to cut a strip of your paper, pick your favorite color, 1.5 inches wide. This is where the knife and ruler comes in handy, but you can do it with scissors if you don't have a cutting board. Just measure and mark it on the back with pencil and cut it as straight as possible. So this is my 1.5 strip, and I'm going to make mine 2 inches long. So because we're going to double it over, we need 4 inches to make 1 earring. So I guess make sure you've got that length. How long is mine? This is 12 inches. Yeah, plenty. So I need 4 inches for 1 earring. I'll cut that. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'll cut another one. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. So this is these will be my 2 earrings. So we take one, fold it in half this way, lengthwise. So the fold is going to be the bottom. It's nice and finished, and the open part will be the top of the earring. So the next thing we do is pick the side you want to be the front. I think I like it with the green, so I'm going to pick that to be the front. So leave that on the bottom and do a mountain fold right in the middle. So there we have a mountain fold. That's going to be the middle fold on the front. And then I'm going to make about 1/4 of an inch fold back. So I'm just going to eyeball that. That's about 1/2 centimeter. I'm going to fold that back as straight as possible, and then just fold that back again. So that's the 2 folds on that side. I turn it over, do another mountain fold, another crease there about 1/4 of an inch, and I can line it up with the previous folds to make sure I'm on track, and then back again. So here we have a little fan. It's only 3 folds, but I find if they get wider, I like the narrow folds. If they get too wide, when you have them on, they're scratching your neck. It's not comfortable. So that gives a little fan. So that's the first one. So here's the second one. We'll do the same thing, fold it in half. So this measurement, the width of your strip is the width of your fan. You can play with that if you feel like you want 4 folds or you want to make tons of folds for some reason. Just don't cut the strip. Cut it wider and start folding and see how much paper you need to do that many folds. So this one, I think that's pretty similar. So that's going to be my front. Fold it once, fold it back about 1/4 of an inch. Hopefully you can see this. It's fairly straightforward. So that's the 2. Then I'm going to go on the other side, eyeball that amount. You might find on one side it seems like you've got extra left, and the other not quite as much, but in the end they'll both have 3 folds and they'll look pretty much the same. So the next step is to make a hole through the top so we can put a jump ring through. So we take our big needle, we go about 1/4 of an inch, 1/2 centimeter down. You don't want to go too far down unless you have a really big jump ring. And really, there's no point in wasting any of that. So we'll go about, I want to go that far down because I don't want the paper to rip. And really, that's why you kind of need a fold about that wide, because you don't want this hole to be ripping the paper on either side. You might not be able to see that, but this one's sticking out a bit longer, so I think I'm going to push that fold a little further over, if I can. Just to make sure this is in the middle, I think I'll go, and then press the needle, hold that down, press the needle through and wiggle it around. It's good to have a cutting board underneath so you're not damaging anything. This isn't super thick paper, so it's fairly easy to get the needle through, and then push it all the way through. You see, it's quite close to that edge, but it'll be okay. Push it right through to the bottom. I do want quite a big hole because those jump rings are fairly thick. Oh, and I didn't mention, you're doing this on the end that has the open edges. That's going to be the top. So we'll do that to this one, about the same. Just, if you're not good at eyeballing, you can measure, but I've been doing this. After a while, you get used to just eyeballing it. Okay, push that all the way through. Okay, so we have our holes. I'm going to grab these jump rings and my pliers. And you have to open the jump ring quite far to get it through that hole, because it's curved. It's a little tricky to get it through. It's not a straight piece, but you don't want to change the curve. I must mention that. You never open a jump ring like this. You always open it sideways so that you don't change the curve of the ring. Whenever you're making jewelry, you always open a jump ring that way. Trying to ease this through. Sometimes you have to open it up and see where it's going. It would be easy if it was a straight piece. There we go. And you could do this with one plier, but I find it easier to do it with two. You could just use your hand for the other side. With a jump ring this big, that's not too hard to do. And I'm gonna close it nice and tight, and then to make extra sure nothing falls off, put that join of the jump ring down where the paper is. There, so that's one. And we'll do the second one. There's different, depending on the paper you've used. This was probably about the thinnest paper I would use. This was the Hilroy scrapbook paper. My drawing paper is heavier, and you can do it. This one was with the drawing paper. And it was great, but it was a little harder to manipulate because it was stiffer, but it really does make a nice solid earring. We'll see how these feel when I've got the coating on them. The 20-pound paper, I would almost have left that with no coating. It had such a nice finish, but these I definitely would not leave without coating. They're too soft. They would get worn red pretty quickly from handling. So this is going to, turning that, well, it's not really meeting. I like to try to make sure these meet as closely as possible. There, turn it around. Okay. So now those are ready for coating. So before coating, you could coat them like this, but then you need to hang them up because you're going to have the coating all over it, so you want to be able to hang them so they're not touching anything. So we put the hooks on first. Now these hooks are fairly simple. You take that, and as in before, never open it like that because it will fatigue the metal and it might break off. Just open it sideways, just enough to put the jump ring on. Make sure it's facing the front. Close that nice and tight the way it was. Some of these open from the front, some open from the back. These ones open from the back. So we've got the jump rings on. And while I was having that pause, I made this pair earlier. So I'm going to put rings on those too. Oh, and I just want to show you something. This one is, if one of them is sticking out a little more, like here, there's a area there that's uneven. I'm just going to cut that off. Tidy it up a bit. Check this one. This one has a little bit of that. You can, if you want to, you can glue that opening before you do this. I don't really find it necessary. Okay, I will coat a second pair. I just did the coating on these greeny blue ones, but then realized I wasn't all in the frame. So let's do that again. So you do need a brush. I'm using the gloss medium coating that I mentioned earlier. And I did make a second pair of earrings. Okay, so I do also need a little brush for the coating. Forgot to mention that. That's pretty basic. Then we just brush it on. You can brush it on liberally first. You want to cover everything. You want to cover up by as much as you can up here at the top where it's gathered. And then do a little dab on the very top. You're giving it a nice smooth coat, plus you're also just protecting it in case it gets a little wet. Now this paper, it depends on the paper. If this one coat sinks right in and the paper still feels a bit rough, this paper might need 2 coats. The 20-pound drawing paper did not need 2 coats. It was so stiff and had quite a smooth finish. The coating sort of sat on the top, on the top of the paper. But this is thinner paper, and it feels like it's absorbing it better. So we'll look when they're dry. If you do the first coat and they don't feel stiff enough, or they feel the texture of the paper still doesn't feel too shiny, just do a second coat once they're really dry. And at this point, if you want to tidy up those openings on the side, you can stick a little bit in there and just, that might help. Now I'm noticing that on this earring, that's a little annoying. That doesn't happen very often, but you can see how this is the hole and me coating that, I guess. There's a little tear there, but I think I can fix that with the coating. Okay, so that's coated. I'm going to stick it on. I'm using this little dish. You could hang them on the bottom rail bar of a clothes hanger if you want. Just find something you can hang them on. I may have already mentioned that. Sorry if I'm repeating myself. So we're just covering everywhere in the front, dabbing the top and the bottom. I'm going to stick a bit in there. Sometimes I find it, oh, this one really, the edges do seem to be sticking out. I think I'm preferring the 20-pound paper. This is the Hilroy paper. It's a little more delicate. Can't take quite as much. The 20-pound paper is very strong. It's really a good solid paper. But we'll wait till they dry. So this is our results from the fan earrings. These 3 I made before. These are the ones we've just finished making. And they are the Hilroy lighter weight paper. It's a scrapbook. They're a little soft. I had to coat them twice, and they're okay, but they're still, it feels like you could fold them and they could, they could get damaged more easily. These ones are all from the 80-pound Strathmore paper. I think I referred to it as 20-pound earlier in the video. It's actually 80-pound. It's much more solid. It gives you a feeling of a nice solid fan earring that's not going to bend or fold easily. different sizes. All of these are the 3 folds. There's 4 folds, and these folds are fairly deep. These ones are good. It depends where they sit on your neck. They might start irritating your neck because they're so wide. I prefer these 3 folds. Anyway, you can do any size you want. It's you can make them shorter, you can make them tiny fans with smaller folds. I hope you have fun with that. Thanks for watching.